Okay, so let's talk about integer operations, but we're going to start this first video off by just talking about how to add and subtract with integers. Integers is a fancy word for negative and positive numbers, no decimals. So think of them as whole numbers that can be positive or negative. So essentially, when someone says integers, they're really talking about what can you do with negative numbers. All right, so with adding and subtracting with integers, we are having some confusion on how to what does that negative mean? Because sometimes it's like keeping track of it, but it's not quite that simple. Sometimes it affects what direction you go in. Sometimes you think you're adding, but you're really supposed to be subtracting. Sometimes you think you're subtracting, but you're really supposed to be adding. And sometimes we don't know what those things mean because we can get confused and turned around when we're in the negatives. So here's what I want you guys to do. I know there are many ways that integers operations have been taught. There's been a rules method where they talk about keep change. There's a number line method that we're going to talk about, and also there's a way that is a combination of both. The way that I want you to focus on is the number line method, because if you practice the number line method, you actually start building your own rules in your head, and those were in little shortcuts, and those you can't necessarily have someone tell you. You got to find them yourself. Worst case scenario, always stick with the number line method, and you'll be able, with practice, you'll get faster at it, and you might not need the number line at some point. Maybe when you get to like algebra 1, algebra 2 type level, you might not need a number line anymore, but you'll start off working with it. That's okay. So you'll notice I've got some questions written. If you think that you understand how to add, subtract with negative numbers, go ahead and pause the video and you try these questions yourself and see if you can get them, and then watch the video and see if you can get the same answers. Okay, so with any adding or subtracting integers problem, the first number, the one that you see underlined in green, that number tells you where to start on the number line, okay? So think of it that way. So let's see. The first number, well, that's not an L, tells you where to start. Now, keep in mind, it does not tell you whether you're going left, right, up, down, add, or subtract. The first number does nothing but tell you where to start. So in each of these questions, you see I underlined the first number in green. So I went ahead and color coded it for you. So for each of them, that first number tells you where to start on the number line. Now, there's different ways of describing this. Some people say start at 0, then move. I just say go straight to that number, because we just want to know what is 2 plus 3. What is 7 minus 4? What is negative 8 plus 5? We want to know what do these equal. So just start at the first number. So let's see. So for the first one, we're going to start at 2. For the second one, we're going to start at 7. I'm going to go ahead and just put down the starting points for all of these. We'll actually solve them in a minute. That one start at negative 8. This one start at negative 4, negative 7, positive 2, positive 7, negative 8, negative 4, and negative 5. Okay, so that first number, I went ahead and just did them all at once. That just tells you where to start. And you guys have been really good about graphing on a number line. You know where to find the negatives and whatnot. That's not what we're worried about. What we're about is making sure we can add, subtract correctly. Okay, so what I have underlined in red in every single question, and number 1 it says plus 3, minus 4, plus 5, plus 13, minus 2, minus negative 5, plus negative 4, plus negative 3. That underlined portion tells you what direction to go in and how far. So to help you remember some things, let's see. Whenever you see an addition problem, like 2 plus 3, or 8 plus 5, or negative 4 plus 13, that plus means go to the right. So whenever you see plus in your problem, so plus means go right. I'm actually going to draw an arrow that says go right. So go right. Okay? So now, that may already give you an idea. When you see minus, such as negative 7 minus 2, such as we had a minus right here, okay? Minus is the opposite. Minus means go left. So let's see. When you have a minus sign, that means go left. Go left. That's what a minus sign means. He means go left. So we're going to talk about what happens when that second one's a negative. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's actually try this. Let's just keep it simple. We'll ignore the ones that have extra negatives in them. Okay, so let's see. The first question, positive 2 plus 3. That tells us start from positive 2. So we have our green dot. So our green dot's already there. So we're at positive 2. So now if we add, what we just learned, adding up here means go to the right. So if we go to the right, okay, so we know we're going to the right. And now go to the right how far? Well, that 3 tells you how far. So from positive 2, go to the right 3 spaces. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. Where you end up, that's your answer. In this case, the answer is positive 5. Now, I know you could have done that question in your head, but I wanted to make sure that you are understanding, even when it's simple, you can still use a number line to help you. So let's see. So the answer to that question is going to give us, we just said, positive 5. Okay, so now, the 2 told us where to start, the plus told us to go to the right, and 3 said how far to go, so we move 3 spaces from positive 2. And look, we end up at positive 5. So that's the answer to that question. So now, let's do one more easier one. We'll look at this one, 7 minus 4. The 7 tells us where to start, so we start off by putting our dot on the 7. Minus, though, we learned up here, minus right here means go left. So from 7, we're going to go left. We see that this is a 4, so that tells us go left 4 spaces. So let's see, from 7, we're going to go left 4 spaces. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Go left 4 spaces, and look where we end up. We end up at positive 3. So that tells you the answer to that question is positive 3. That's what that equals. So now, the idea of going left and going right, that's the key here. But you have to know where you're starting, because sometimes tricky things happen. Both of those questions, both those numbers appear to be positive, so we're wondering, well, sure, that's easy. I know how to do 7 minus 4. I learned that back in the 3rd grade. But now we're going to talk about how that same concept, we're going to use it even when you have some negative numbers. Okay, so let's see. If we had negative 8 plus 5, so we're on this example right here. Negative 8 plus 5. Negative 8 tells us where to start. So we have our green dot right here at negative 8. That's where we're starting, right here. So now it says add. We know add means go to the right. The 5 tells us 5 spaces. So from negative 8, you go to the right 5 spaces. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go to the right 5 spaces, look where you end up. You end up at negative 3. So that tells you the answer to that question is negative 3. Now, the idea of what I want you to realize is, you're thinking, well, hey, that's like saying 8 minus 5. That's kind of like saying 8 minus 5, 3. So, but it's negative. So here's how I want you to think of it. Think of it this way. If we go out to negative 8, that tells us we are 8 spaces away from 0, okay? So here's 0, we're at negative 8. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're 8 spaces away from 0. So now that tells us if we're going to go back towards 0, meaning this said to add 5, which means go to the right, and if we're to the left of 0, that means we're going to go back towards 0. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to head closer to 0, which means your distance from 0 is going to decrease. So think of it this way. I am 8 spaces away from 0. I'm going to now decrease my distance from 0 by 5 since I'm going to the right and I was starting on the left. So from there, if I'm 8 spaces away and I decrease my distance by 5, I'm still not going to reach 0 because I'm only got 5 spaces, but I'm actually 8 spaces away. So you know you're still going to be negatives, but you also know 8 minus 5 is 3, but no, you're still going to be in the negatives because it wasn't enough to get you to 0 into the positives. So that's another way to think about that. Okay, so negative 4 plus 13. Sorry, I kind of butchered. I actually erased it earlier. So negative 4 plus 13. So the negative 4 tells you where to start. So you put your first dot on negative 4. It says add 13. Add means which way again? Let's see. Up here it says add means go right. Okay, so from there we're going to go right. We're going to go right 13 spaces. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And look where we end up. We end up at positive 9. So that tells us that's the answer to that question, positive 9. And now notice, in this example, we crossed 0. We went all the way from negative 4 all the way to positive 9. So we had a positive answer. We didn't necessarily know we were going to have a positive answer. There's not really a sure way of saying a negative plus a positive is a positive. That's not true when adding and subtracting, because it depends on how big are they. So let's see, -4 told us we were 4 spaces left of 0. 4 spaces left of 0. So now, we know we're 4 spaces left. We know we're going to the right 13 spaces, which means we're gonna go towards 0 and keep going. So you can ask yourself, if I've got to go 13 spaces and I go 4 spaces just to get to 0, that tells me I have to go 9 more spaces. So if you're going 9 more spaces from 0, you know you're going to end up at +9. That's another way to think of it. So -4 plus 13 is +9, not -9, not -17. That means you just took their kind of numbers, ignoring the negative right here. You just kind of added them and then kept it negative. That would all be wrong. You went in the wrong direction. Those are the common mistakes we're seeing. All right, so let's see. And the one right below it, we're at -7, and we start at -7. It says -2. Well, minus, we learned up here, means go left. So from -7, if you minus and you go left, look, you're actually going deeper into the negatives. You know that because you're starting in the negatives. It says minus. Minus means go left, so you're going further into the negatives. So let's see, let's go deeper into the negatives. 1, 2. So if you go deeper into the negatives, look where you end up. You end up at -9. If you said -5 to this answer, unfortunately it would be wrong. And that means you went in the wrong direction. Because when you're in the negatives, that's kind of the opposite almost. If you think of it as, because a lot of people just want to do negative, they just see 7 minus 2, they think 5. So they're like, oh, 5, well it's negative, so -5. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the correct answer, because when you're in the negatives, when you subtract, you go to the left, but when you go to the left, you go deeper into the negatives. So the number's absolute value increases, but the number itself does not appear to necessarily get smaller. It actually, because when you go further to the left and go deeper in the negatives, that is smaller, even though it doesn't look like it. All right, so let's see. In each of these examples on the right side, we have where the second number is a negative. So that brings me to my next point. We practiced what to do with just adding and subtracting when the second number didn't have a negative sign in front of it. But over here, we're going to talk about what to do when the second number has a negative sign. So here's what you need to know. If the second number is a negative, and it'll be clearly identified by saying -2 or 4 plus -5. The second number will clearly be labeled with a negative sign, usually with the parentheses. So if the second number is a negative, here's what you do. You do the opposite of what we just talked about on the left side. I'll just call it the left examples. Think of it as the negative numbers, such as -3, -4, -5, -11. Think of negative numbers when it's the second number as like maybe a naughty child. They always want to do the opposite of what they're told. So think of it that way. So let's see. This says 2 plus. So we're going to start at 2, so there's our green dot. It says plus. Plus makes us want to go to the right. But because the second one is a negative, he doesn't follow instructions, so he does the opposite. So we want to go to the right, but that one says we have to do the opposite. So you have to go to the left. So from +2, you're going to go left 3 spaces. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. You go left 3 spaces, and look where you end up. You end up at -1. Now, some of you are like, well, hey, I just went to the left. I learned I go to the left when I just regular old subtract. Well, that's actually true, because you can think of that question. For starters, I'll write the answer. That question can also be written as 2 minus 3. Because when you add a negative, you'll start to realize every time you add a negative, you go left. Another way to think of going left is by saying subtract, like over here when we subtracted 4. So you can change these to a subtraction problem. Some people take the subtraction problem, they turn it into this, and that's fine. That's if you're using the rule method and someone taught you they'll keep change, that might be one way to change it. But when you're using the number line, you don't need to change. So this can be thought of as this, and this can be thought of as this. Whatever you need to help you think about that moment. They mean the same thing. So let's see, let's look at the next example. The next example says 7 plus -4. Now, the plus makes us want to go right, but that negative sign, he does not follow instructions. So we're going to end up going left. So from 7, we're going to go left 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We end up at positive 3. We end up at positive 3. And now, we can also write this one. If you wanted to, you could have thought of this one as 7 minus 4. And there's nothing wrong with that. So now let's see. Number, it doesn't have a number on this one right here. So negative 8 minus negative 5. The negative 8 tells you where to start. Minus makes us want to go left. Minus makes us want to go left. But this negative sign does not he does not follow instructions. So he's going to do the opposite. He's going to go to the right. So from negative 8, we're going to go to the right 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3. That's the wrong color. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And look where we end up. We end up at negative 3. Now, on this one, you'll notice we end up going to the right. When you minus a negative, you go to the right. And we learned up here, when you go to the right, that means you added. Like in this question. When you go to the right, you add. So you can actually change this question to fit that. You can rewrite it as, I'm going to put or. So that could be negative 8 plus 5, if you want to think of it that way. Okay? So negative 8 plus 5. That's another way to think of that. And negative 8 plus 5, that doesn't mean go deeper into the negatives. The answer is not negative 13. The answer is go to negative 8 and go to the right 5 spaces. And if you do that, you end up at negative 3. So the answer is negative 3, not negative 13. So anytime you see a minus and negative, you are more than welcome to change that to just an addition problem. Technically, it's negative 8 plus positive 5 now, but it just kind of does the difference. So think of it this way. This negative sign kind of undoes the minus sign right here, so it becomes an adding sign. This negative sign kind of negates and does the opposite of this adding. So the opposite of adding is subtracting. So it's kind of, the concept technically has a name, but I'm not really concerned about it. I mostly want to make sure you're thinking about go left, go right. Am I essentially going to be adding by going to the right? Or am I essentially going to be subtracting by going to the left? Even if that subtracting going to the left takes you to a number that kind of makes you think it's bigger, but it's not. Negative 9 is smaller than negative 7 because it's further to the left on a number line. All right, so let's go to the next example. Negative 4 minus negative 11. Minus, we want to go left, but this naughty negative 11 does not follow instructions. So we're going to go to the right. So just like here in this example, we're going to go to the right. So from negative 4, I want you to go to the right 11 spaces. So let's say negative 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So from negative 4, we'll go to the right 11 spaces. And so we end up at positive 7. And that's going to be the answer to that question. Now, if you want, we can also rewrite it as negative 4 plus 11. That's how you want to think of it. Not a problem. So let's see. We're going to do a couple more examples. So now, down here, negative 5 plus negative 3. When you add, you want to go to the right. But when you have that negative sign like that, you're going to have to do the opposite and go left. So from negative 5, we're going to go left, because add means go right, but that negative doesn't follow instructions. So we go left 3 spaces. So 1, 2, 3. And we end up at negative 8. So that tells you the answer to that question is negative 8. And that question can also be thought as negative 5 minus 3. Regardless, as long as you go deeper into the negatives with your answer, you are good to go. So let's see, these are some examples of adding and subtracting negative numbers where some of them we crossed 0, some of them we did not cross 0, some of them we just stayed in the positives, some of them we stayed in the negatives. And so just there is no hard, fast rule, but if you just think about this, what we set up here, the first number tells you where to start. If it says add, that means go right. If it subtract, that means go left. However, if the second number is a negative, such as all the examples on the right, you do the opposite of what these say to do on the left. Okay? So do the opposite when it's negative. So now I'm gonna do 2 more examples with larger numbers to show you that it still works. So we'll do 2 larger examples real fast. Let's say you had negative 23 plus 15. And you'll notice that's off of our number line, so might be in trouble. So now over here we've got, I'm going to write one more, negative 37 plus 44. Because both of these are clearly off of our number line. So unfortunately, we can't necessarily use the number lines I have, and that may happen a lot. You'll have large numbers that it's not time effective to write on a number line that goes to negative 57. So here's what I want you to do. You're going to think of the concept of what you're doing. So let's see, negative 23. That tells us start on negative 23, and from there, you have to decide what direction are you going in. We just learned when you add, it means go right. So from negative 23, you're going to go to the right 15 spaces. Now, sure, that's off our number line, but let's think of it. Negative 23, that's going to be way out here, okay? So way out in the negatives. So now, if we start that far out, you agree with to the left of 0. And in fact, we're 23 spaces to the left of 0, to be precise. When you add, you go right. If we go right, we're going to be heading back towards 0. So we decide, okay, so that means we're 23 spaces away from 0. We're now getting closer to 0. Are we going to reach 0? If we're 23 spaces away, we're only coming 15 spaces back. We are not going to reach 0. So you know you're going to have a negative answer. You're still going to be somewhere in the negatives. So you just have to decide. If I'm 23 spaces away and I come back 15, that's kind of like saying 23 minus 15. And so that tells you there's 8 spaces left over. That's how short you're going to be of 0. You're still going to be 8 spaces short of it. So you're actually going to end up at negative 8. Because if 23 spaces to the left, and then you come to the right 15 spaces, you're going to end up at negative 8. And you did that even without a number line because you realized how deep you were in the negatives. You knew you're coming back to the right, back towards 0, but you weren't going to make it to 0. So that tells you, that's going to be negative 8. So now, in this example, negative 37 plus 44. This one's definitely off of our number line, but the idea is the same. And this one, we also are going to the right. We're going to the right 44 spaces. I do not recommend you draw a number line for this necessarily. I want you to think, okay, negative 37. That means I'm way off to the left. I'm 37 spaces to the left of 0. And so now you have to say, okay, if I'm 37 spaces to the left of 0, and now I'm coming to the right 44 spaces. 44 is bigger than 37, so you know that you're actually going to you're going to hit 0, you're going to keep going. So you know the answer is going to be positive. So we know it's going to be positive. So I'm going to put a little plus sign to tell us positive. We just have to decide how positive. So let's see, if we're 37 spaces to the left and we're coming 44 spaces, we go 37 spaces to get to 0, so we have to go 7 more spaces to go 44 spaces total. So you know you have to go 7 more spaces. So if you go 7 more spaces from 0, you're going to end up at positive 7. So that tells you the answer to that question is going to be positive 7. Positive 7. So that's a way of thinking about how we mentioned when you practice your number line skills, you can start to get better at making more and more rules and shortcuts in your head, even when you have problems that are outside of your number line. When in doubt, though, if you got time, just draw out a number line and go ahead and do each of these problems. So, brief recap. Remember, first number tells you where to start on the number line, so the first number tells you where to start on the number line. What's after that tells you what direction to go in and how far. Adding always means go to the right. Subtracting always means go to the left. If the second number is negative, you do the opposite. So adding, but if it's plus and negative, that means you're going to go to the left. You're going to do the opposite of adding. Going to the left is just like saying, hey, I'm subtracting. So now, if you're subtracting, you want to go left, but if you're subtracting a negative, that second number being negative means do the opposite, go to the right. So you can change all minus and negative problems to an addition problem, not a problem. So just remember, start on the first number, go in the direction it says to go in, but count how many spaces. And don't be too confident sometimes. If you think you got it the first try, count one more time. All right, guys, so this should help you with adding